Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, a podcast that aims to address divorce, separation and co-parenting here in the UK, countering the often sensationalist way it's portrayed in the media, challenging the status quo and driving for reform. On each episode, I'm joined by experts to discuss divorce and separation and co-parenting from different angles and to give their opinions and to debate them. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor and divorce coach, co-founder of Amicable and host of the Divorce Podcast.
With me today, I have Beck Jones. Beck has a background in family law as a family law solicitor with over 8 years' experience and has also been through her own divorce. She's fantastic at offering pragmatic advice and is a fountain of knowledge when it comes to the legalities around divorce, separation and co-parenting. Beck has been a divorce coach at Amicable for over 5 years and has authored and appeared in a number of articles surrounding the topics around divorce and separation and co-parenting, as well as being known for her tips on how to maintain a blended family. Welcome, Beck.
Thanks, Kate.
I'm also joined by Anthony Syder. Anthony is a dispute resolution practitioner with experience across multiple sectors, including family, employment and commercial. His areas of interest include the voice of the child, diverse and inclusive families, and human rights. Anthony currently sits on the board of the Family Mediators Association and is a divorce coach and partnerships lead at Amicable. Welcome, Anthony.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, this is a bit of an unusual episode because I'm joined by two of my colleagues and it's great to see you both and thank you for making the time. Not sure who's running Amicable today, but anyway. The joy of having you both is that you've come from such diverse backgrounds. So Beck's been a lawyer, Anthony's been in mediation. And so the purpose of the podcast today is to really look at the different options people have when they're going through a divorce, separation, or trying to sort out co-parenting issues. And to look at it from your perspectives in terms of you've got experience in these sectors, what are the pros and cons of the different approaches? But before we get to that nitty gritty, Beck, I'd like to start, if I may, with you, just to ask how you got to Amicable. So you left a very lucrative career as a family lawyer and you've become a divorce coach. What led to that change?
I think, Kate, for me, when I was practicing as a family solicitor, I had quite a huge feeling that my clients were quite dissatisfied at the end of the process. So despite putting every effort into it and helping them along the way, there never felt to be any sort of winners. Well, there were no winners in family law ever, is there? So at the end of the process, it just felt like they just weren't satisfied and didn't really get much out of the process. And actually a huge thing for me was I found they would quite often be in a worse position with their ex at the end of a lengthy court process that we'd been in. So maybe when they first came to us, they had an okay relationship and then they became hugely polarized. And at the end, it was damaged by the court process. And I think in some cases it was almost irreparable, to be quite honest. And I found that really sad that they'd come to that, especially when there were children involved and they'd be carrying on their co-parenting relationship post the divorce. So for me, I felt like this adversarial system did not work for people. And I just thought there has to be, a better way doing it than I was doing. So for me, working with a couple together, a divorce coach, is a huge satisfaction. So leaving that lucrative career behind me, it is easy because I'm satisfied and I'm helping people along the way, which is hugely important to me.
It's really interesting to hear you say that. It really resonates with me. I've, going through my own divorce, felt that the process polarized me and my ex even further and led to huge acrimony. And I think, as you say, it's the impact it has on the ongoing co-parenting relationship that is quite so damaging because time can heal and you can get over how you individually feel. But that damage to the family unit and that inability to work as co-parents when your children need you most, when there's such huge change in their lives, I think is really key. So it's interesting to hear you reflect that, that not just as somebody going through it, but as a lawyer, you also had those same feelings.
Yeah.
Concern that the process was actually making things worse, not better.
And I think, Kate, you can't unread something you read in a solicitor's letter, the way it's written, the way it's come across, because you're in that adversarial system. You hear it again and again. I don't think you can unread it once it's there in black and white. Whereas the beauty of doing it as a couple together in these sessions, it's a safe format to talk through options, to talk about how you feel without actually having to reread and go over things that have actually hurt you quite deeply through the whole litigious process.
And it's not that you changed your personality when you took the lawyer cloak off, is it? You obviously had that desire to help, as many family lawyers do. Lots of people go into the profession with a desire to help, don't they? But it just feels like the process is working against you, whatever your individual or personal desires are.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I definitely chose family law after going to uni and law school, because it was the area that was more human, that I felt like I could help and could engage with people. So that's absolutely the reason why I went into family law as opposed to another area of law.
Yeah. Anthony, I'll just bring you in here then. So your background is mediation. So how did you get from mediation to being a divorce coach with Amicable?
Yeah, I guess it was similar in a sense to what Beck was just saying. So I did my law degree, but to be honest, wasn't particularly engaged with it. Didn't really feel like it was a good fit to me. But the last couple of papers I did was in family law and in mediation. And I thought that felt like a good fit. Fortunate enough that it coincided with a law change in New Zealand where family mediation was a lot more prominent after that. So I was in family mediation for the last sort of 6 or 7 years, really enjoyed it, really enjoyed, similar to what Beck was saying, helping families navigate through a really difficult period and difficult times of change. Like you were saying in my introduction, really my sort of passion is in the children that are going through separation as well. Being in that position myself when I was younger, I guess is sort of why I got into this line of work rather than going through a separation or a divorce myself.
So you're the child of divorced parents, you mean? And so that was a motivation for you? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was something that I was always sort of aware of growing up, that it didn't flow as well as it could. There was a lot of tension, a lot of difficulties there. And so sort of learning about mediation made me realize that there is a better way, and that part of the problem is that people that are going through this don't always know that there is a better way. I think people feel as though the only option they have is to sort of lawyer up and battle it out. And obviously there are so many alternatives and good alternatives as well. So I guess the change for me from mediation to divorce coaching was in part because I felt as though there was a gap, really. Mediation is really effective and really useful for people who are, in dispute or really stuck on a particular issue. But there's a much larger group of people, I feel, who aren't necessarily at odds with each other, but they're just a little bit stuck in terms of, well, this is such a big process. There's so many things that we need to consider. Where do we start? They just need a little bit of help. It's not that they disagree with each other necessarily, but it's just that they don't know what the easiest and best way forward is. And this is such a good solution and option for them.
I like your point that it is the case still, isn't it, that many people, when the D word is mentioned, think that the automatic response is to go and seek the help or the services of a lawyer. Whereas actually, if you're just taking a step back and thinking about there are lots of different ways of solving issues around finances or children or a divorce, rather than automatically going down the legal route, that's a really important pause, isn't it? A really important step to take, just to have that bit of time to think about your options, because there are lots of different options, aren't they? We've mentioned, obviously, we've got the amicable service. We've mentioned mediation. There are solicitors you can go to. And ultimately, if you can't work between yourselves with a third party, there is the court route. How do you think, Anthony, that mediation differs to the work that you do with amicable? Because they sound quite similar on the surface, don't they? It's one person working with a couple to try and resolve a dispute. So what do you think the differences are?
Yeah, and there's lots of things in common in terms of the skills that are involved in the work that we do. I think the benefit of divorce coaching is that it's more of an end-to-end service. It's more of a one-stop shop, really, that you can come in at the point of separation and work through all aspects of that, whether it be the divorce aspect, the finances, the childcare arrangements. And to an extent, you can have similar conversations in mediation. But what I felt in mediation was that you were sort of getting to a point where they've sort of reached their agreement and then you're sending them off to somewhere else to finish off that job. Whereas what we're able to do is just have that one point of contact, that one person that is working with both of you right the way through. And people find that that's a lot more settling. It's something that they've built a rapport up with you. They're not wanting to go to 3 or 4 different people in different areas and retell their story and get slightly different, perspectives on things that, they felt like they've already worked through with the other 2 people that they've seen. So I think that's probably the largest difference.
And I think touching on that, Anthony, is that you can't, with a mediator, you get your memorandum of understanding, then you go to your lawyers, don't you? And I think that can create a bit more delay, and things can get unhinged with things you've already agreed, which I found with people as well, which we can help.
Yeah, so the big difference is that at amicable, we can write all of the legal documents, whereas a mediator will get you to the point of memorandum of understanding and then send you to 2 separate solicitors to have advice on the agreement and then to write it up. I wonder if there's another difference as well. I know that some of the work that we do involves not just working with people in the meetings, but we provide that emotional support that runs alongside those meetings. Beck, what difference does that emotional support make in your view?
It's invaluable, that extra emotional support, because the sessions we do together virtually are obviously essential. We're doing it together with the couple, but outside of that, people always need support. They need to speak about things, to digest things, or to go over it following a meeting, even if it's just to get a bit upset with the divorce coach after. And I think without having that assistance, I think I couldn't do my job as I do it without offering that help to people. They find it just such a big support to be able to reach out to you outside of the meetings and along the process when they feel anxious. Or
I think it takes off some of that pressure, doesn't it, in the sessions, because when I was working in mediation, there's a lot of pressure to get everything sorted in the session. You've got an hour and a half, and we've got to really use this time. Whereas, different people need different levels of support at different times as well. So being able to just sort of touch base with people before a session or after a session can often mean that time spent together is a lot more productive.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes when you're dealing with finances, some people get it quicker than others, don't they? And so it's quite nice to know that, okay, even if I don't understand it 100% in this meeting, it's okay. I don't have to, because I can get it explained and go through it again. So
definitely. And Beck, what role does a solicitor normally take in a divorce or separation then? What part do they play?
I think they play a hugely important role, with some people who wouldn't find mediation or our service right for them if they're vulnerable, or there's coercive behaviour on either side, or there's any form of domestic violence. I think there are situations where you would need a solicitor to take your stand and act for you in your best interests, or if you were concerned that your ex was hiding assets or anything like that, then there's a hugely important role for solicitors to play with people within a divorce.
Yeah, and it's important, as you say, that it's not that one process is better than another. There are lots of different processes, and it's about taking the time to pick the right process for you.
Yeah.
So I think you mentioned there, didn't you, some typical times when people would need a solicitor, when there's the hiding of assets, as you said, or domestic violence or concerns. Then it's right to go and have somebody who's going to effectively fly the flag for you, because that's the job of a solicitor. The solicitor works in your best interests. By contrast, then, Anthony, what's the amicable process then? If we're not working in individual interests, how are we working to get a resolution?
So we're working with both of the people that are involved in terms of helping to achieve their wider goals and helping to ensure that the outcome is the best outcome for the family unit. So, also when children are involved, always when children are involved, both parents are saying that that's their priority in the process. And that's a really good starting point, because they've got that common goal. Even if they don't have the same goals for the process, they can't reach that finish line without the other person. So it's in both of their interests to work together to help them both. So I guess that's the sort of approach that we're taking in terms of working with couples together, is that it's not saying that everything is going to be easy. There's still challenging conversations, but it's that both of them want to get to that endpoint as pain-free as possible, and as without the stress that other processes sometimes have, particularly the more sort of legal processes where that's not always necessary.
What do you say then to people who say, well, if no one's looking out for my individual interests, how am I going to be successful in a negotiation? I don't feel that I can stand up to my ex. How do we help people in that circumstance?
I guess, Kate, in terms of what I would say is we do help people to communicate with their exes as well, which I think sometimes people say at the end of the process, well, I can communicate with them now, I never could before. So you actually help them to get their voice, or help them to negotiate effectively and properly with their ex. I think that's a big thing. And I think the other thing is we can offer external support if they need an actual therapy or coach or life coach or something, just to help them, give them a bit more support for themselves if they need it, which I find really helps people sometimes in the sessions when they've got that other support.
Yeah, I think 9 times out of 10 are capable of making their own decisions. They don't need a judge to make those decisions for them. They just need a little bit of help in getting there and having those conversations. I mean, the work that we're doing means that there's been a relationship breakdown. So, it's not always going to be easy, but it doesn't mean that they're incapable. They just need a little bit of support. And that's where we can play a really important role in helping to get them to a point where they can then make those decisions and feel confident with the decisions that they're making as well.
So, Anthony, what factors do you think people need to consider when deciding on what process to use? So they're going through a divorce, they've got to separate finances of children, issues to sort out. How do they decide which process is going to be best for them? What are your top tips?
So I think my top tip would be to almost start at the end and work your way backwards. So think about, what do you want things to be like when all of this is done with? And then having a bit of a think about what process is most likely to get me to that point. So for example, if you've got to be in a position where your child sees that handovers are running smoothly, that you can have a little bit of a chat on the doorstep, everyone's on the same page. Well, is going through a court process going to achieve that? Or is it more likely that going through a process where you can have those conversations, you can work out a bit of a plan, is that going to be a better fit? Like you were saying before, all of these different processes have a role to play. It's not to say that there is, one process that works better than any others. It's just about identifying which process is the right one for you. So that would be my top tip.
And Beck, why do people sometimes default to the court process, do you think? I mean, we know lots of people use the court where the court recognises that their cases shouldn't be there and that there are better alternatives. So what drives people to using the court? And are there some myths around that, do you think?
I think, as we touched on earlier, I think some people actually don't think there's any other avenue to do. They're not aware of our service or other services, and so they just go to a solicitor. And I think sometimes once you've kind of hit the button and gone to a solicitor and initiated a court process, it's very hard to get out of it.
Yeah.
And once you've become slightly, it can get tit for tat, can't it, really, with letters going back and forth. And to withdraw yourself from that, you have to really be able to reflect on actually what you want to achieve, not in that moment of time when you're just desperate to get one up on your ex. So I just think once you're in that process, it's just so tricky to get out of it.
I mean, the common objection we get a lot is my partner won't disclose, or I'm not that even they won't, that people are suspicious about whether people are being honest. And sometimes I have to say to people, even if you go to a solicitor, if someone's determined to hide assets, there's not an awful lot you can do, is there? It's very tricky.
Very tricky. And even,
go on,
Kate, so even if when you were touching on there about people think they're going to hide assets, I think quite often when you're ending a relationship and there's a breakdown, you just don't trust that person for various reasons. And actually that translates to, well, they're not going to be trustworthy now. But actually, I think I find with a lot of customers, you are going to get the disclosure. Just because you have this mistrust of each other, it doesn't mean it's going to translate and that they're not going to be dishonest during that process as well. So quite often just going through that with someone and they think, oh, actually, I think it will be okay.
Sometimes it's about the timing, isn't it? Sometimes when things are really raw at the very beginning, the best advice is just to give it a little bit of time before you dive headlong into a process. Because I think when you're feeling that raw and you're feeling that vulnerable and your back's against the wall, it's very easy to dive into a process where you feel you're being protected and that somebody else is going to stand as a shield in front of you and keep that big nasty ex away from you. And ultimately, that just stores up a problem for later on, where you've got to work with your ex if you've got kids. And when all the help drops away because you've finished the sort of technical aspects of the divorce, you're left without any ability to communicate. And things are very difficult then for the children and for you guys to move the relationship on to a co-parenting footing.
And it's just one of those things as well, that it's going to court is always rolling the dice. There's no given in terms of what the outcome's going to be. And one of the myths is around, if you have a view on what you think the outcome's going to be and you sort of refer to Google, you will find 10 things that will agree with you. There will be 10 best case scenarios where that did happen, but there will also be 10 scenarios where the worst case happened and it was completely the opposite. And that's something that I think people need to bear in mind as well. The other thing is that in terms of best case scenarios and best case outcomes, no one ever talks about how much time and how much money it costs to get to that point as well. So the end
stress
might
as
be,
well.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely.
Drain on your emotional resilience. There's a whole host of things it's going to take to get to what might not be the best outcome for the family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, like you say, some of those things are not quantifiable, are they, in terms of monetary numbers? You can't say that one process is cheaper or less expensive than another, in the way when you're in that awful process, the emotional toll has an unquantifiable value, doesn't it, to you? Definitely. I always say to people as well, when you're getting, because you go to a solicitor sometimes, you get the advice you want to hear. I always say to people, you should just then ask the solicitor, if my ex was sitting in this place giving you the opposite story, what advice would you be giving to them? Because then you will understand how polarizing advice can be.
Yeah.
Because obviously, if a solicitor was acting for the other person in the case, they'd be giving totally different advice. So the advice you get is just one set of advice. There is some opposite advice that your ex will be given, which will then polarize the two positions and leave that yawning gap in the middle very often.
And I think, like you say, Kate, once you've heard something that is your best case, sometimes it is quite tricky.
It's hard to let go, isn't it?
To let go of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just move on now just to think a little bit about no-fault divorce, because we know that the legislation has passed through Parliament and that on April the 6th next year, no-fault divorce will come onto the statute books and we will be able to use that system. Anthony, what do you think that means for people in our professions, so solicitors, mediators, divorce coaches? What difference will no-fault divorce make?
I think there'll be a lot more interest really in people looking to begin a process like this, because there are many people who feel as though the biggest hurdle is starting that process as it is currently, in terms of deciding on what a grounds for separation would be. So I think the ability for there to be a no-fault divorce, a lot of people sort of feel as though they've separated amicably, it just for whatever reason, unfortunately, didn't work out. But they don't want to begin a process by sort of blaming the other, really. It's more just about getting on with it. So I think that will mean that there are more people looking to do this. And generally, those are the people who are wanting to do it in an amicable way, in a way that is just straightforward, stress-free. There are matters that need to be talked through. There are things that need to be decided, but it's not something that anyone's necessarily in disagreement about. So I think that the biggest impact will be probably more interest.
Yeah. And I think as well, we're all quite well versed, aren't we? And I think there's been a lot of information put out there that says the law is changing and you won't have to blame each other when you divorce anymore. I think the other thing that's really interesting from in terms of the way that we work perspective is that for the first time, you'll be able to divorce as a couple. So you won't have to have a petitioner and a respondent in the way that you have had to have previously. You'll be able to do this together. And so if you can start the divorce process together, why wouldn't you then continue in a process where you can work as a couple throughout the entire part of the process, not just dealing with the children aspects or the financial aspects as we do now, but you'll be able to do everything as a couple. And I think then services where you've been able to work as a couple, like in mediation or like our service, will really come into their own, because there'll be some consistency all of a sudden.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, bringing the law more up to date with what society feels about divorce. That getting divorced now isn't seen as big of a deal as it once was. It's just something that does happen. And I think that, that's reflective in the way that, for example, mediation, even when I began, which wasn't all that long ago, 7 or 8 years ago, was still commonly referred to as alternative dispute resolution, whereas now it's just dispute resolution, because actually it's not that alternative. It's not out of left field or, too out there of an idea. It's what a lot of people are actually wanting. That's what that's the sort of process that they're wanting to use, whether it be, divorce coaching, mediation. The last thing that most people want is to go through a long and difficult court battle, essentially.
Anthony mentioned there that starting off on the right foot will be possible now as a consequence of the new legislation. What impact does starting it on the wrong foot have on a process like ours?
I think it's not how you want to start it, is it? We know we don't want to blame anybody, and we're here as a couple. But when you have to say, look, I know we have to pick the facts, and we are going to have look at how we do that. It'd be so much better when we just have to say, right, we can do it as a couple. We just start this process, and we don't even have to go into the conversation of how they're going to start a divorce process, which doesn't sit well with how we do the rest of our work with the couple together.
No,
because at times currently when people start a process like this, there's no tension, and we're almost having to create a bit of tension because of a legal process that they have to go through,
which they don't understand. They don't get why do we don't want to do that? Why would we have to do that? And even though we can downplay it and help them through it together as a couple, we're still having to call someone the petitioner, call somebody the respondent. So it'll be great when we can just start as a couple and carry on and finish as a couple, throughout the whole service.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. I think that it's going to be such a relief, isn't it, to be able to have that consistent feeling of being able to do the right thing. Absolutely. Beck, just turning the tables then to perhaps solicitors who might be listening. You've made that journey from solicitor to divorce coach. What are your top tips for anyone who might be considering a similar move?
I think definitely sort of think about how different you have to have your mindset in terms of as a solicitor and a divorce coach. I know you're used to that with mediation. You have your solicitor hat on or your mediation hat on, but as a divorce coach, we are looking and prioritizing the family and the couple. We're not thinking about one person and what their best case scenario is. So just sort of thinking that through and making sure, I can switch my mindset. I can use my legal knowledge to transition into a divorce coach, and that's something that I want to do, to work with couples together rather than one person in a process.
Well, you are the living proof that you can make that transition. It's not an easy transition though, is it? Because when you've grown up with the law, it's very ingrained in you in terms of what you should and shouldn't do. Absolutely. We challenge and we push those boundaries and we work in a very different way. I think it might make some people feel quite uncomfortable. So because you're used to go on the minutiae as a lawyer, you've got to have your spot on attention to detail at all times. And there is an element of gameplay and guess with negotiations. You have to drop that and you have to be able to just utilize the skills you've gained as a lawyer in a different way. A sort of more authentic way, do you think?
Yeah, more holistic and more sort of just, you can use them, you can transition them, but it is quite a hard transition to do. You cannot get stuck on the minutiae or like you would as a lawyer. You really can't. I think, Kate, probably one of the things that did help me was that I had actually gone through my own divorce as well.
Right.
So I think that coupled with being a divorce lawyer actually really helped me recognize certain things that I needed to do when I was a divorce coach.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because lots of the people who work with us have either had Anthony's experience of being a child of divorce or have been divorced themselves. Anthony, do you think it makes a difference in terms of helping people and being able to walk alongside?
I think it helps to be able to sort of understand some of the things that are unspoken. So some of the things that people are worried about or concerned about, because particularly when it involves children, parents are always thinking, well, is this going to have an ongoing impact on them? How can we reduce the impact that this is going to have on our children? Are we doing the right thing? Because there's endless options. And of course, there is no one right way of doing it. Everything is unique to the specific family and even the individual children. Two children from the same family going through a separation, different things will impact them different ways. So I think having that experience myself helps to sort of be able to connect with them, just to sort of understand really the thoughts that are going through their head at different parts of the process as well.
And just finally, Anthony, you've made that transition from mediator to divorce coach. What's your top tip for anyone thinking about the same? Do you recommend it?
Yeah, well, I think both are really good options. But of course, I think that we're doing things along the same lines in terms of our ethos. We're, in both divorce coaching and in mediation, what we're doing is helping families, helping couples move through that difficult stage. I think for me, one of the biggest challenges was learning the legal side of things, but it also feels as though I'm utilizing the sort of knowledge and the skills that I gained from my legal qualification more as a divorce coach. Obviously, the awareness of it assisted in mediation, but it feels as though I'm able to apply those skills a lot more.
Look, I could sit and talk all afternoon to you both. It's just such a treat to get, two such brilliant guests on the podcast, and just in terms of being able to really sort of hammer home the different processes. And the key thing for anyone listening to take away really is there are lots of different ways that you can access help and support when you're divorcing and separation, and just spending a bit of time investing in finding out the right process for you and your family is absolutely key, because it has such a big impact. So thank you both so much for your time. So Beck, how can people get hold of you or get in touch with you if they want to find out more about the work you do at Amicable?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Kate, and connect with me on LinkedIn. And they can also send me an email at rebecca@amicableapps.com if they've got any queries or questions. I'm always here to talk them through.
Brilliant. Thank you. And what about you, Anthony?
Yeah, similar. So Anthony@amicableapps.com for my email, Anthony Syder on LinkedIn, and Anthony_Syder on Twitter.
Fantastic. And of course, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Kate_Daly, and you can hear more about the new podcast episodes by following at divorce_podcast. You can also find out more about this podcast and subscribe for updates by visiting thedivorcepodcast.com. It's been a real treat and a pleasure. Thank you both. And thank you everybody for listening.